Hello, friends, and thanks for watching. Today, I'll be interviewing friend of Vestigo, Jeanette Mellinger. I first met Jeanette during a research effort she was leading with our friends at DVX on a cybersecurity business that we're co-launching, and I promise there's going to be a lot more on that in the coming months. Jeanette has developed a brilliant approach to customer development and ideation and was kind enough to work with us in how we could improve our own research process. We're extremely excited about our new tools and wanted to share her perspective with all of you. So without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Jeanette. Hi, Jeanette. Thanks for being with us today.
Good to see you, Fraser. Happy to be here.
I hope you wouldn't mind by starting off by sharing just a little bit about your background with us.
Yeah, so I'm a user researcher. I can explain even what that means in a minute, but I usually say that I'm a user researcher by nature and by trade. I've always been fascinated by behavior, but more formally started to explore that in college. Went to Stanford where they luckily had a bunch of behavior related majors. I studied behavior in undergrad and got a master's in psychology and then started to apply this in industry. So I've worked with big companies, small companies, early, late stage, consulting in-house, a lot of different ways to get to know people in different types of companies. But throughout my career, I've progressively moved earlier and earlier because as for instance, at the beginning, I was consulting with larger companies like Procter and Gamble, who are really committed to understanding their users. But usually by the time that you come in at that stage, things are pretty set, right? The
Mhm.
example I usually give is that, we sometimes get brought in as user researchers to define what the color of the water bottle might be. And then you uncover that no one wanted a water bottle and it's just too late and too frustrating for everyone. So I've progressively moved forward. My most recent in-house role was as the head of research at Uber Eats, and it's really fun to be there during hypergrowth mode. So I always love chatting not only about user research, but also how to grow a team really quickly, which was part of that journey as well. And then now I've moved much earlier stage. I'm an early stage consultant and advisor. And this started by collaborating with First Round Capital. I'm their user research expert in residence. But now I've had a lot of fun branching out on that model, including collaborating with folks like Vestigo, in which I'm teaching research and also partnering with firms on how to uncover the problems that they're trying to solve for their users and define their businesses in that way. And so I do some consulting with small early stage companies. We're talking pre-seed, seed stage, maybe Series A, but then also with a range of venture firms and incubators to help them understand how to bring less bias into getting to know the teams they might want to invest in, or helping their portfolio companies. So having fun experimenting with ways to apply user research principles to help build better businesses and build better venture firms. Is that a fair assessment from your
That's very
experience thus
fair.
far? Mhm.
Yes, and I'm afraid I'm going to violate one of your user research interval rules, but fortunately, this is a conversation, so I'm allowed to. Um, you started out very much in the kind of academic sort of field and approach to this, and have worked your way through a number of different commercial experiences. So I'd love to understand how that informs maybe your applied skew on these techniques.
Mm, mhm.
And but I do think it would help if you started by defining a little more concretely what user research is for us.
Perfect. I'll do one and then two. What Fraser is referring to is that I usually say you can only ask one question at a time. But I like these two questions, and I'll start with the second one first. What's user research? It's a good question. Still hard to even accurately define for my parents, smart as they are. But it is the field in which you deeply get to know your users, and this will start to bleed into your other question for me. This is a bit of understanding what people are doing, what their behavior is, and why. Why are they doing it? User research came primarily from the design and product space, but a lot of these principles go across many other functions. And we use a range of qualitative and quantitative methods to explore this. As you have a more mature organization, you can tap into, we'll say 20 different methods for getting to know this, but the ones that you all probably know are in-depth interviews, and surveys. Those are the two that we lean on the most, particularly in early stages. But it's a mix of understanding behaviors and attitudes. Behaviors are essentially what people are doing. But for instance, if you see someone coming in and then immediately dropping off of your app, you don't know why that's happening. So the more in-depth approach that we tend to apply, which involves understanding people's context and also bringing in, let's say, academic principles related to behavior, helps us understand more of why these behaviors are happening. And that way, the application of it is to try to build a product that best and better serves your users. So to your second question, or your first question, excuse me, I personally love to blend some of the academic principles, things that we know to be, or we believe to be true as much as one can in academia, to the sort of, we'll say, fresh primary research that we conduct about your product. So it's, if we understand a model for behavior change, there's been one by BJ Fogg, his behavior model I've been leveraging for client work for easily a decade
I
now.
absolutely love this one. So yeah, don't feel any need to be brief when you're describing this, because I actually was trying to articulate it the other day and I forgot one of the pillars and I felt silly, but I was like, no, listen, this is great.
Okay, I'll do a dorky BJ Fogg aside in a moment then. Yeah, he's great, but applying those things that we have seen to be true across how people make decisions or how they behave, that might be true for most of the people you're working with, and then comparing that, triangulating it is the word that we'll use, with what you learn about your specific users, and then comparing them. But you don't need to reinvent the wheel and figure out a decision-making framework that happens to, let's say in my case, work for eater decision making at Uber Eats. And people have been eating, people have been deciding for a long time. So how do you bring these two together is part of the way that I like to approach this. The BJ Fogg aside is that he says that behavior change, which by the way, is anytime that you want to convince someone of something or get them to try your product for the first time. It's not just all of us trying to drink more water. Almost anything that we're trying to get someone to do is considered to be a behavior change. He says that that happens when three things occur at the exact same moment. One, you are motivated. Two, you have the ability to do something. It is just really easy. And three, you are prompted to do something. You have a trigger to do something. So we often lean on motivation. We'll say, I know that I should be flossing my teeth. Yep. And I know that especially right before my dentist appointment that I should be doing it, but you probably still won't floss your teeth unless it's really easy for you. You know how to floss effectively. You have a bunch of containers of floss in convenient places for you. And then prompted, you say, you know what, every time that I brush my teeth, that's when I will remember to floss. That will be my trigger to floss. It happens when, after a lot of practice and time, these three come together at the same time.
It's so true, and such a great way for us to think about these elements, as we've taken a lot of your learnings, hopefully, and continue to incorporate them at Vestigo. I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of synthesis. When you have all this experience working with large companies, I think it's sort of straightforward to understand the very natural use cases for these techniques, and then have moved to early stage companies, which is in some sense, I think, quite a bit more nebulous, as far as you're not just asking what color the cup should be, you're asking, like, should it be a cup or a spoon or a credit card? And I think, when we met, we were launching, or are still launching, a cybersecurity business with our friends over at DVX. And that sort of had a hybrid investment component to it. And then, the engagement that we did together and is ongoing with Vestigo is really focused on using these techniques to improve our investment process. So I'd love to understand, kind of, if maybe one from each, one major similarity throughout these approaches and maybe one major difference.
Yeah. So the similarity, I'd say, is that no matter what stage of development or decision you're trying to make, we all have bias. And the more that we can lean on, try to remove that bias and lean on data that we can trust more, the better, right? And this is maybe, again, where I have a little bit of a bias coming from the academic side of things and really even trying to articulate what are these various forms of bias. The quick recap is that two or three that you might want to be aware of. One, acquiescence bias. We all tend to want to be nice to one another. So if you say to someone, hey, do you think this idea is good? And they see that you're excited about it, they'll probably tell you yes. Is that a piece of data that you can lean on? Not necessarily. Confirmation bias. If we already believe we want this investment to be a really good one, we want this space to be hot, then we will not only ask questions that it may subconsciously lead people towards saying, yes, that's true. But even the pieces of data that we pick up on from the conversation, the quotes that confirm our biases are the ones that we lean into more, while not necessarily looking into or leaning into the ones that contradict it. And then another part of human nature to be aware of is that we're really bad at predicting the future. So we like to ask people, would you use my product? How much would you pay for my product? Would you, invest in this? And they'll probably say yes, or just you might not be able to necessarily rely on their ability to predict their own behavior. The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. This is true whether you are an investor saying, how do I feel about this team? Do I feel like this is an area with promise? If you're an early stage company saying, I think I'm going to make a cup, not a spoon, or you could be much more mature and still, you might now be down to tweaking the color choice of the water bottle, and still bias can creep in. And that's where not only understanding your users and knowing that a successful business comes from having a product that people want to use, but also being aware of the fact that bias might creep into your investigation of those questions, and that it's always good to make sure that you either have some awareness about how to ask those questions without bias, or you bring in a researcher who's been trained to do so. Either way, as various industries and companies understand that it's important to talk to users, it's just as important to be able to talk to them effectively. Mm-hmm. So that's the main similarity, is that it's always good to be aware of our biases while still getting to know our users. That's how we can trust what we hear from them, right? And then the differences are, of course, the granularity of the questions. I still say that, and this is kind of a hybrid answer, there are three main questions that you can think about bringing user research in for. It's when the company is saying, what should I build? Mm-hmm. Like, should it be a cup or a spoon? Or it could even be down to the next feature, right? Mm-hmm. How should I build it? Well, you want to build it in a user-centered way. That could be a good time to, again, understand behavior as you take that first pass at building it. Did I build it well? That's the time that you think of bringing in user research. Again, it's like, can someone hold the water bottle, or, is it the right color? And instead, the earlier that you can move that investigation, the better. And so those questions, I would say, are asked at all these different stages of companies that I've worked with, but maybe the granularity that you're going to go into is going to be different. And there's a lot of different stages that you could bring a user researcher in for. I tend to see it happening. Historically, it's been a lot later, again, almost once you're at that did I build it well stage. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing more companies start to bring them in earlier, but I think that you want to consider when to bring in a user researcher, and it depends on how complex is the space. I said there's 2 methods you can lean on, or 20, or however many there are, right? When do you need to get into that granularity of investigation? How confident do you need to be in getting to know this space, in addition to normal questions of funding? So I think the granularity of both the questions and the complexity of it, as well as how much you want to investigate it, differs from beginning to end. But I think that all these companies are conducting user research, and they're just not calling it that.
Well, I know, sorry.
I think the only other point there is just, it seems as though the memo's gotten out there the last 10, 20 years to talk to your customers, but we're not calling that user research. And thus, we're probably losing a lot of the benefit that we can have in those conversations. Again, if we're coming in with bias and without a little bit of expertise on how to get more out of those investigations. So the more that we recognize that we're all doing user research, even when you and I are having this conversation, how do you get me to open up and get excited to tell you more versus have really contained answers? That's a thoughtful, intentional practice that I'm excited to try to bring those principles to places and stages that didn't even realize that they were doing it, let alone could benefit from doing it more.
Well, if the purpose of this interview has been accomplished, I suspect the user research hook has been fully set into the audience at this point. And I don't want to take up too much of your time. So I would ask, though, how people can get started or learn more about this, whether they're another investor like us, or a founder or a CEO or some kind of executive, or really anyone.
Yeah. I mean, the first piece is you're recognize that you're doing some user research, and it doesn't hurt to think about at least recognizing the bias that you might bring into it. And I'm happy to connect your audience with some good resources for starting to get to know it themselves. They can always reach me if they have questions via JeanetteMellinger.com. I mean, are you going to have my name in the show notes so that I don't have to
Put you
spell
in
out
the
the
show
whole
notes.
long name? Okay, great.
Yes.
wholelongname.com. And then from here, maybe even just from this conversation, try to ask people one question at a time was the tip that I showed earlier, right? When you're talking to people, give them the space to excitedly open up. And to remember that you're dealing with behavior. Get to know BJ Fogg and think about, do I understand the motivations of the people that I'm trying to serve, but also what enables them to try my product, or what might prompt them. Like, recognize that there's a lot that you can get out of adding a little bit more of a dorky behavior spin to this. But yeah, I'm happy to answer questions and direct people towards other more specific resources anytime.
Perfect. And friends, you can reach out directly to me or to Mark, and we'll help coordinate as well. Thanks so much for being with us, Jeanette. Dinner is on me next time we're in the Bay Area, which I suspect will be before the end of the year. Or make sure that you come and see us if you're in New England anytime soon.
That sounds great. It's been a pleasure to collaborate and also to talk shop.
Thanks. Bye now.